Hi, good afternoon. Welcome to Trail Talk. I'm so glad you could join us today. I want to say hello to Mr. Lewis, joining us from Zoom. Welcome.
Hi there.
Hi. Are you an expert on Henry Flipper by chance?
Expert. I guess by most people's standards, yes, I am.
Are you really?
I I'm from Milan, Michigan.
Uh-huh.
I'm an attorney by trade, but I also have a group called the African American West Project,
Right?
and we discuss the roles of African Americans in the development of the American West. So I've been lecturing in schools and wherever else anybody would ask me to go to for probably 20 years now.
Oh
So
my
yes,
goodness.
I know Henry.
You know Henry. That is so awesome. Well, I just want you to know, I mean, I've done research, but if there's anything that you feel that needs to be added or corrected uh, while we're on Trail Talk, please feel free to jump in.
Be happy to.
Okay, and mind if I ask you, how did you hear about Trail Talk?
Oh, I think I was cruising through Facebook and I saw it.
Wow, well, very good. Well, welcome.
I
I'm
looked
I'm
through
very
all the
excited.
other past ones that you had to see if there was something
Right.
else I was interested in, but Henry drew my attention.
Henry got your attention. Well, very good. I'm excited. So, welcome as everyone who's able to join us. We are live at the Chisholm Trail Heritage Center in Duncan, Oklahoma. And the topic today is Henry Ossian Flipper. Um, so I have known about Henry Flipper for probably maybe 10 years because during our education program, we have one session that we do about the land runs and the settlement of Oklahoma. And we have a portion of that where we talk about the Buffalo Soldiers and their role in Indian Territory and the land runs. And then we always have a little focus on Henry Flipper because of his notoriety. And today, I hope you'll find out a lot more about him than just the fact that he was the first African American to graduate from West Point. And also the first, I want to say, first commissioned Black officer in the U.S. Army. Those are like the tip of the iceberg for Henry Flipper. He has a very interesting life, and I'm going to tell you, I did research and found information online, but one of my main sources was this PBS movie. It's called program, I guess. It's called Held in Trust, and it's the story of Lieutenant Henry O. Flipper. And Ossie Davis is the narrator. It's introduced by General Colin Powell, and Bob Sneed, who is our current featured artist, plays the role of Henry Flipper on this production. And the piece of art that we have featured here is a piece done by Bob Sneed, kind of as a tribute to Henry Flipper. And I love when people are focused in history, like Bob Sneed focused a lot on Henry Flipper, and the more attention we can put on people in history and just find out about these people, and not just, like I said, the high points of their lives, but dig deeper and find out more about them. I think it gives us a broader picture of life for many people in those days, the late 1800s, early 1900s. So anyway, I'm excited to jump into this lesson today. Mr. Lewis, have you seen this Held in Trust?
I believe yes. I didn't get a copy of it, but yes, I've seen it.
Oh, well, so I was interviewing Bob Sneed's daughter a couple of weeks ago. He has passed, and she was talking about his exhibit is called Buffalo Soldier Revisited. And so we were talking about Henry Flipper, and she told us about this. And there was like two, it's only on VHS, and there were two of these still out in the World Wide Web floating around. So one of my coworkers was able to get a copy of it. So it's very fun to have this now. But Henry Flipper was born into slavery. His parents were owned by two different people, and I guess being married did not make that ownership different. And it wasn't until Henry's father, the man who owned him, was moving away from Thomasville, Georgia, to the Atlanta area, then Henry's father took his savings. He had been able to save money, make money and save money, and he was able to then purchase Henry and his mother from that person that owned them, and then they were able to leave as a family. And then Henry had I believe four other brothers. So their family, they stayed together, and his father and mother had high aspirations for Henry and his brothers. And they spent the rest of the Civil War in Atlanta. And there was a new, it was a church that sponsored a school, and Henry and his brothers were able to attend that school and graduate. And then Henry attended Atlanta University. It's now known as Clark Atlanta University. And I did not look this up, but is this an HBCU? Do you
Yes,
know? It
yes.
is? Okay. I had a feeling that it might be. And so there's another interesting part of Henry's life. And he was on the video, Mr. Sneed portrays him saying, I was an okay student. I wasn't, the top. I was kind of in the middle, but he was a hard worker. And from I'm going to say just the fact that he was selected, I guess in those years, for someone to be able to attend West Point, they had to be kind of handpicked from a region. Maybe there were just so many people from different regions. That this is how the video explained this. And Henry was appointed by Congressman James Freeman of Georgia to attend West Point. So he had to kind of make application, I guess, for that appointment. And then Congressman Freeman selected him, but then he had to pass entrance exams and physical exams and all of those things to be accepted actually into West Point. And so all of those things happened. Now, he was actually the 6th African-American to attend West Point. There's only information that I found about one other cadet who was still there when Henry Flipper arrived at West Point, and his last name was Smith. James Webster Smith was his name. And he wrote Henry Flipper a letter kind of telling him what to expect. And it wasn't fun and games. It was, I think he was trying to be very real about the fact that, yes, you've been accepted here by the school, but that doesn't mean you're going to be accepted here by the other cadets. It's going to be hard. But Henry Flipper, I think, was a very determined young man. His desire, his entire life, he wanted to devote his entire life to serving in the U.S. Army. And so he was I think he was glad for the opportunity to be able to go there. Shortly after he arrived, Smith was actually a senior when Henry Flipper arrived. I have a picture of him here as a cadet. He's so young. It looks like he's just a baby, but I'm sure he's maybe a teenager at this time. Let's see, 1873. He was born in 56, so he's like 17 years old. Anyway, Smith failed a philosophy exam, like that was the last in his senior year, and was not given the opportunity to retake it. And so they dismissed him from West Point, which meant he was not going to have the opportunity to graduate from there. Some people, there's some information that tells us that some white cadets were given another opportunity to retake a test. I mean, that is something that is often offered to students, but James Webster Smith was not allowed to do that. And so he left, and that meant Henry Flipper was the only Black cadet on the entire campus of any of the years of students that were there. So he was pretty much given the silent treatment while he was there. There was, in this movie, he had taken his textbooks and covered them in leather. His dad was a leather worker, and it made me think that maybe he learned how to do some of that from his father. But he covered the books with leather covers and then put his initials on the covers. And there was another cadet who asked to borrow his textbooks, and he agreed to loan them to him. And when he got them back, that cadet had taken those covers off because he didn't want anyone to know whose books he was using. So even though this is, 10 years out from the Civil War, so much of those same feelings still existed in the racism, the prejudice that was held against these African-American people. Well, Henry Flipper, as an African-American student at West Point, a soldier, at West Point, doing all the same classwork, all the same physical demands, all the same everything. But there was that separation was still there, and it seemed as though it was very distinct.
If I can add something.
Yes, please.
It was fortunate that he got out in a lot of ways. There was one cadet who was also court-martialed. He had been assaulted by a group of cadets. You know what the phrase hogtied means? Hand behind your back, feet pulled up. That's how they found that cadet. And the court-martial ruled that he tied himself up, beat himself up, and so he lied by making charges against other cadets, so they tossed him out.
That is
A pretty impossible story to say,
right.
How did he do that?
Right. I mean,
So it wasn't just a silent treatment. They went out of their
right.
way to mistreat.
Right. I honestly, I think that this video might have made reference to an incident, that incident that you're speaking of. They did not mention him being hogtied, just that he was assaulted, but all the witnesses said he had been the assaulter.
Right.
And so he was had to leave the academy. But these are the kind of frustrating stories that are just repeated, over and over through history. And Henry Flipper's silent treatment may have been like the best of the situations that he could have experienced. At least they were
gonna get.
Right, yeah. So, but Flipper says, and this is kind of a neat scene in the movie where Bob Sneed is portraying Flipper, and he says, "There was no society for me to enjoy, no friends, male or female, for me to visit, or with whom I could have any social intercourse. So absolute was my isolation." And so this is a young man who is determined, but he's lonely. And he has probably, the option of, I throw myself into why I'm here and what my dream is, and I just stay nose to the grindstone, or, succumb to these emotions, these feelings that would be very overwhelming, I would think. I mean, he's so young, I can't imagine. But he excelled in engineering, law, French, and Spanish. On June 14th, 1877, he received his diploma from General William T. Sherman. And the New York Times wrote about the ceremony and said, "When Mr. Flipper, the colored cadet, stepped forward and received the reward of 4 years of hard work and unflinching courage as any young man can be called upon to go through, the crowd of spectators gave him a round of applause." And I thought, wow, after 4 years of arm's length, silent treatment, isolation, I don't know, it seems as though his determination, his spirit, his character overcame all that. And in the end, all of that was what people really saw in him. The other cadets acknowledging that, General Sherman acknowledging that. In fact, on the video, they said that he went on to say that, no other cadet has carried the hopes of his entire race on his back like Henry Flipper has. And I thought, what a great weight to carry. And yet he carried it through. And so again, these are the kind of people we love to learn about from our history, because these are such important character traits that we should teach young people, and hope that inspires them to live lives of that kind of character. I think it's so important. He later wrote in his memoirs, which, by the way, I found both of his memoirs online last night, and they are going to be at my house on Saturday. I'm very excited to have these books. But he always aspired to become a soldier, and that is why what happens in a few years after having this part of his dream fulfilled is so sad. So he was commissioned as a second lieutenant and left for Oklahoma. So he was stationed at Fort Sill, and Mr. Lewis, Fort Sill is about 25 miles probably from where we are here in Duncan. So Henry Flipper was a part of the 10th Cavalry, which was also known as the Buffalo Soldiers. And they were renowned for their bravery and their fighting skills during the Indian Wars. And so Henry Flipper is assigned to that regiment. Here he is, Lieutenant Flipper, has his extra things added to his uniform there. And just very distinguished and a lot of pride. You can tell that this is the picture that Bob Sneed used for his painting. He became a very capable engineer. He built roads, telegraph lines from Gainesville, Texas to Fort Sill. And he also engineered a system that would drain the stagnant water that was standing in ponds around the Fort Sill area. Fort Sill is, in part, it's at the base of what we call the Wichita Mountains. And there are, just these natural low spots. There there were bison wallows and things like that all around. And there was a lot of stagnant water. And that water was a great breeding ground for mosquitoes, and malaria was a serious problem for the soldiers who were stationed there at Fort Sill. Well, the drainage ditch is still known as Flipper's Ditch and is registered as a National Historic Landmark today. So that's on my checklist of places I want to go see over there now, with an opportunity to go to Fort Sill. I've been there before, but I had no idea that this was there. And in the movie, it was being described as, because of his engineering skills, what he built appeared that it was as though it was going uphill to the untrained eye. A commander came and looked, and he said, well, I mean, it looks nice, but it's going uphill. But Henry Flipper knew that it would create the proper drainage flow for these to get this stagnant water out, and it did, and it eased the cases of malaria that they were having to deal with. So it was very successful. What an excellent bit of practical history that we have there. So while he was at Fort Sill, the commander was a man named Henry Nolan. And Henry Nolan married and brought his wife and sister-in-law back to Fort Sill. And Henry, I wrote Henry Nolan down. I don't remember that they had the same first name, but maybe they did. Anyway, he liked Henry Flipper a lot, was very impressed with him and his, I wrote down Henry Nolan, and with his abilities, his thoughtfulness and hard work, ethic. And so he boarded with the Nolans. And he and the commander's sister-in-law, her name was Molly Dwyer, became very good friends. And they would ride horseback around Fort Sill, probably through the Wichita Mountains, and just around that whole area. They just spent a lot of time together. In the movie, Henry Flipper insists that they were only ever friends. And she does later marry another lieutenant who did not like the friendship that they had. He was very antagonistic toward Henry Flipper. But when he had to leave Fort Sill to be stationed at a different, when he was sent to Fort, I thought it was Fort Davis. When he was sent to Fort Davis in Texas, he wept. In the movie, he said he sent his men on ahead and he rode up to a hilltop and just looked out over the area. I'm kind of getting chills thinking about this. And he was moved to tears because of the joy he had experienced, fulfilling his life's dream, his purpose, the friends he had, the camaraderie he was experiencing. And, it was I can imagine it just being such a precious time in his life. In the video, he said, that was the last time I ever remember crying. And so despite things that were coming along, I feel like those must have been tears of joy. And that was what motivated Henry Flipper to that height of emotion, was the joy he had known and the sadness of leaving that behind. So they went to Fort Davis, and then later he was reassigned to, before he went to Fort Davis, they went to another fort where he had an incident with the great chief, Apache chief, Victorio. Bob Sneed also has a portrait of Victorio in the collection that is here right now. And I had a chance to kind of study different chiefs from this area before, and Victorio was one of them. But Henry Flipper made a horseback ride for, I think he said it was like 24 hours. He rode to get to another location where Victorio and his warriors were headed that way. And so he was able to get there, get word to this other regiment, and essentially save them from an attack by the warriors and Victorio. So he was well known for that ride, for his bravery, and for just being willing to give of himself to help other people. So in Fort Davis, Commander Nolan was still there when they first went, and he had promoted Henry Flipper to quartermaster. So he was in charge of keeping track of all the supplies, the food, the logistics of moving all of those things, storing all of those things. It was a very important task. And then Nolan left, and another commander came. On the video, it was really hard for me to understand what his last name was, just because of the sound, but they called him Pecos Bill. He did not like, he had been vocal about the Black Regiment, about Henry Flipper being a lieutenant, being in charge of other soldiers. Those things did not sit well with him. Perhaps he was a Southern person, and just that was
Could
instilled in him. Is that correct?
I add one piece of context here?
Yes,
Because the
please.
Buffalo Soldiers were all black units when they were created in
Mhm.
1866. It's the 24th, 25th Infantry. Well, by the time Flipper gets there, it's the 24th, 25th Infantry and the 9th and 10th Cavalry. All these soldiers were black. The highest rank held by an African American was sergeant until Flipper comes along. Most of the officers, I shouldn't say most, a large percentage of the officers in the U.S. military at that time were Southern. Part of the reason why Texas would be a problem is, if you'll remember, Texas didn't get the news about the Emancipation Proclamation till 2 years after it had been issued. Texas
Yes.
was not a friendly place. So it
Mm-hmm.
may not just been where he was leaving, it was where he was going to. So when he's
Mm.
as a second lieutenant, he's one of one.
Right.
And people, when Congress passed the act creating the Buffalo Soldiers in the first place, there was a huge debate about whether African Americans would stand and fight or they would just run, or how intelligent they were. And the thing with
Mm-hmm.
Flipper's Ditch, there were
Mm-hmm.
several other lieutenants that tried to build that thing and they all failed. Now, of course, they were
Ah.
all white and they all failed. And here comes this guy who does it on his first try. So
Mm-hmm.
there were a lot of reasons why they didn't like him.
Mm-hmm. And I think, I got the idea that Commander Nolan, being a friend, helped maybe make a little hedge of protection for Henry Flipper from some of, other people being able to talk him down and to, be disrespectful and things like that.
Right.
But once he's gone, and another commander who doesn't have that relationship and doesn't know Henry Flipper, and maybe doesn't want to, it creates a completely different environment for him. Would you
Oh,
agree with that?
that's absolutely true. And plus, I'm sure that there was a lot of talk between other officers where he had originally been stationed and the officers in Texas,
Mm-hmm.
because they probably had formed an opinion about him before he got there,
Right, right.
and it
And
wasn't a
back,
positive opinion.
right, Lieutenant Nordstrom, who ends up marrying Molly Dwyer, um, is actually at Fort Davis also.
Right.
And so, and that's when he and Molly Dwyer end up getting married. But yeah, he already had this big chip on his shoulder about Henry Flipper. So yeah, I kind of felt like he was absolutely an instigator because he had been around him for so many years by that time. But when Commander Nolan left and the new commander came, he, in essence, he dumped a lot more responsibility on Henry Flipper and did not give him an assistant to help him. And in the movie, it is portrayed as though Henry Flipper accepts his responsibility as a soldier would and does what is asked of him. And so I did not find this in other research, but in the movie, Henry Flipper's telling the story and says that the commander asked him to take the money that had been held in the office to his personal barracks, or quarters, to his personal quarters. And so he said, I thought that was an odd thing to tell me to do, but it was an order, and so I did it. And so he had the money in a trunk in his quarters. And sometime later, he was balancing his books and saw that there was a $1,400 discrepancy. Now, by this time, he had written his first book, The Colored Cadet. Let me find that. West Point, I believe. Colored Cadet at West Point. And he had royalties. He was anticipating a royalties check. And on the video, it said for $1,444.40. And so he thought, when that check arrives, I will put that money back into the where this money is kept, and I will repay my error. I don't know how this money was taken or why it's missing, but I'm going to take care of it. And feeling not having the confidence, and because of the attitudes toward him, I'm thinking he did not tell anyone else about this situation. So then let's see, I'm going to say this right. Okay, so someone came and essentially did an audit of the money situation, and they found more than $3,000 was missing. So they court-martialed Henry Flipper, and they charged him with two things: embezzlement and conduct unbecoming an officer and a gentleman. So a trial ensues, and after 28 days of trial, which I thought was unbelievably long, I cannot believe that went on for 28 days. But they had, letters and people saying things on behalf of Lieutenant Flipper, and then people had, I guess, making other statements. But because of his relationship with the people who lived around Fort Davis, the area, and I took it as other soldiers as well, people took up a collection, and they were able to come up with the total amount of money and give it to Henry Flipper, and he was able to pay off this missing sum of money. And so he gives a statement, and after this 28 days, and he says that he declares he was innocent and the money has been paid back. And so the all-white jury determines that he is not guilty of embezzlement, but he is guilty of conduct unbecoming an officer and a gentleman, and as a result of that is dishonorably discharged from the United States Army, which is the greatest disappointment of his life. because that was all he ever wanted, was to serve in the army. That was his dream. And it was like, I just thought of all the things that they could have done to him. This was the crushing blow. You know, this was the one that was so disheartening for him. And yet he made the statement that when he left Fort Sill was the last time that he cried. And so I felt like he must have had emotions that were just stronger than tears, you know, just a grief inside him, probably anger and so much more. So he left the army in 1882, and he moved back to El Paso. He had been there, and then he served as a Spanish translator and became an expert in land rights and property law. He ended up going to New Mexico and working in an area where he was helping Native people there be able to have proper claims on the land that was rightfully theirs. He worked with, he worked with the Department of Justice Court of Private Land Claims for 8 years, and this was where he would survey land grants and appear as a government witness in several court cases. He worked with 2 Mexican mining companies. During Mexico's Civil War, Flipper supplied information on conditions in the country to the U.S. Senate Subcommittee on Mexican Affairs. I mean, I hope, viewers, that you're hearing all of this. Henry Flipper never gave up on himself. He had skills and he had abilities, and there were so many other people who saw the value in him as a person with skills and just the ability to be in the middle of something very controversial and to be able to stand his ground and do the right thing. He became special assistant to the Secretary of the Interior and left for Venezuela to serve as a mining engineer. He returned to the U.S. in 1930 and retired a year later to Atlanta, Georgia, and then died 10 years later in 1940. He was 74, I believe, whenever he passed. To my knowledge, he never married, never had children. He was living with his brother and nephew when he passed away there in Atlanta. So he wrote, this was his first memoir, The Colored Cadet at West Point. And so that book would have been published in 1881, maybe 1880. He was expecting a royalty check for it when the embezzlement and conduct unbecoming charges were put against him. So that one was an early memoir. And then he also wrote Black Frontiersman, the memoirs of Henry O. Flipper. And I feel like this book is probably going to cover some of the, the later years where he was doing some incredible work for the United States government. Work that seems fit for someone very becoming as an officer and a gentleman, in my opinion. This says that the Colored Cadet at West Point was published in 1878, and the Negro Frontiersman book, this one, my information says it was published in 1963, so it must have been posthumously put together. I'm anxious to get my hands on a copy. Mr. Lewis, do you have these books?
Yep.
Do you?
Yeah.
So was the second one put together after he passed away?
It's compiled and edited with the introduction and notes by Theodore Harris.
Okay.
And because, by the way, let's see. In memory of, trying to see what year, this is 1990, it's copyrighted in 97. So yeah, they would have
Okay.
picked stuff from earlier accounts
Uh-huh.
because I think he was married. It
Oh,
seems
really?
that my memory just ticks that I have a picture of him and his wife somewhere.
Well,
Uh,
I will be glad to find that
I mean, I
information.
could be wrong.
Uh-huh.
When I teach about him, I focus it a little bit differently than you are. I really stick to what the gist of his story was, because when I look at who I'm talking to, um, young folks don't really care about the dates. That's one of the reasons why they hate history
Mm.
so much. So I
Yeah.
really want to get the story across, so the dates don't matter to me as much.
Mhm. Right, right. Well, I'm anxious to get my hands on those books and read more about him from his own words. I think that that will be very interesting as well.
Yes, it is.
Um, so he after he died, there was a man in Atlanta who discovered the story of Henry Flipper. And he met Flipper's niece. She was quite elderly in the picture there was a picture of them on this movie. And anyway, he brought the case before the, I don't know what the court would be called exactly. Well, okay, so when Henry Flipper died, his brother wrote on the death certificate that he was a lieutenant in the United States Army. He refused to put that he had been discharged, dishonorably discharged. So this man took this case, and in 1978, a new discharge was issued to Henry Flipper, dated June of 1882. This happened on December 13th, 1978. And showing that he was actually honorably discharged from the United States Army. And I mean, of course, it's very sad that he has no way to know of these occurrences afterwards, but I do think it's only right that things were set in proper order. But the argument, which
You
is a
do?
very sound, reasonable argument to me, he was innocent of embezzlement. And so that fact alone should have completely done away with the other charge of conduct unbecoming an officer and a gentleman. If he wasn't guilty of the
But
first
how
thing,
vague is that charge? You know, when I tell
right?
the story, I'm like, I say, he asks, and I'm kind of inserting a little bit of what's logical to me. All right, wait,
Mm-hmm.
exactly what do you mean conduct on becoming an officer? And what it really went back to was when he was out riding with that young lady in a time
Mm,
when he didn't do that, but there he
mhm.
was.
Right.
Because I mean, he pursued that um exoneration for years, right to his grave. And I
Mhm.
believe the person that led that, well, yes, his discharge was changed, but it wasn't until President Clinton came around and there was a school teacher who pressed the issue and said that he should get a full pardon. And Clinton issued a full pardon to him.
Mhm.
Well, after his death, obviously, but
Right. Yeah, I think that didn't happen until 99. So
right.
very long after. But the other part of the story that I think is important is February 10th, every year is Henry O. Flipper Day, and it's celebrated at West Point.
Mm.
And one of the ways they celebrate is by the presentation of the Henry O. Flipper Award to a senior. And in the West Point military talk, it's called a firstie. Just thought I'd throw that in for fun. but it's awarded to a senior who demonstrates the highest qualities of leadership, self-discipline, and perseverance in the face of unusual adversity. And of course, named after Henry O. Flipper, we know that these words describe him, a leader, a man of self-discipline and perseverance in the face of unusual adversity. I'm so glad to be able to have this opportunity. It's Black History Month. This is a man from our nation's history who served our country well, who devoted himself to service. How great that he was able to continue serving our country. It just wasn't the way he had envisioned or hoped, but that opportunity was still there for him. And he really has left an indelible mark in our nation's history. He is the kind of person we should seek to emulate. And I think there's so much to learn from him as an individual. And then also, just like I mentioned earlier, from the times that when he lived, and how he really, he was a victim of a lot of the attitudes of the day, and yet he was an overcomer as well. You know, those days, those attitudes, the anger, the hatred towards a person because he was Black did not keep him down.
Can
And
you mentioned earlier about how history repeats itself?
yeah, yes.
He was not the only person who was court-martialed based in part on his relationship with a white female. There was another cadet in the 40s, I believe it's 1940s. He was also court-martialed. And there they were going to bring this young woman up to testify that to the relationship that she was having with this first lieutenant. As she stood up, she stumbled a little bit, and this older Black gentleman who was sitting next to her grabbed her arm. Well, in those times, that was not done.
Right.
And so the older gentleman stands up and says, "Sorry, sir, my daughter was about to fall." His daughter was very, very light complected and could pass for being white. That first lieutenant was named Jackie Robinson. The court martial was dismissed, and Jackie Robinson went on to break the color barrier in baseball and do everything else that he did. But the stories are almost identical,
Wow.
except it wasn't a white female or white woman that he was dating. It was another Black woman.
Right. I don't remember that part, that the movie about Jackie Robinson, 42.
No,
I believe.
I remember the movie, and that wasn't part of the history that they
They
were
didn't go back that far.
They were just
I
talking
don't
about
think.
being a baseball player.
Yeah.
I
Wow.
I have a ton of books sitting over here. I ran into a book and it said Jackie Robinson, and I looked it up, flipped through it,
Mhm.
and I like having the photographs because then I like to take them and use them just like you're doing behind you. And there's
Yeah.
Jackie Robinson in his army uniform sitting on this tall, dark horse. Um,
Wow.
and that had the story of the court martial in it as well. So history did
So
indeed.
Jackie Robinson was a West Point graduate.
Yes,
Wow.
and served in the army as a lieutenant, just like Flipper.
Just like
Probably
Flipper.
had to put up with a lot of the same discriminatory practices as Flipper did. It may not have been as severe, but I'm sure it was still there.
Oh, right.
I mean,
Well,
look at how he
he
got treated
did.
playing baseball. So we know he got
Exactly.
going to school.
Exactly. Wow. That is a great story. That makes me want to go do a deep dive on that now and see what I can learn. Well, is it Mr. or is it Doctor, or
Oh, I'm just Doug.
you're just Doug?
I'm just
Well,
Doug.
thank you. I appreciate you joining us today. This was such a great addition to this episode of Trail Talk, just totally unexpected. And I just love it. I thank you very much for sharing. Do you have anything else you'd like to add?
No, just thank you for having me and let me chip in. Always enjoy that.
Oh, yeah, this has been really great. Actually, I would like to pick your brain about a couple of other things if there's a way I can get in touch with you.
Um, if I put it in the chat, does it go out to the rest of the world?
No, not the chat. If he puts it in the chat box right there on the Zoom chat box, no, it won't. I'll just get that. If you'll take a picture of that before. Okay. Thank you so much, everyone, viewers. Thank you for watching. I hope you learned as much as I did just trying to find out about one of, well, this session that we're teaching here at the Heritage Center, we call it Oklahoma History Heroes. And you know what? I think Henry Flipper was an Oklahoma history hero. He was stationed right here in Oklahoma, and it seemed to have been one of his favorite seasons in his life. And so we might just have to claim him as one of our history heroes. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. And Doug, when we sign off, we always say happy trails. So we will see you guys next week on Trail Talk. Happy trails.
Be well.
Thank you.